Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. At 35, David Brown thought he had life figured out. His days were filled with comforting routines, a loving wife, a cozy home, and a circle of dependable friends. Everything seemed perfectly aligned with the life he'd envisioned for himself. But all of that changed in a single evening, an evening that shattered the foundation of his carefully constructed world. That night began like any other. David returned home, tired but content, anticipating a quiet evening with Evelyn. As he stepped into the house, her familiar perfume greeted him, stirring memories of their shared life. He smiled, picturing her in the kitchen preparing a meal, perhaps one of his favorites. But as he entered the living room, the scene before him was far from ordinary. Evelyn stood by the fireplace, illuminated by the flickering glow of candles. She wore a red dress, the same one she had donned on their honeymoon. Her beauty struck him anew, almost surreal in the soft light. Gentle music played in the background, adding to the ambiance. David grinned, his curiosity piqued. "What's the occasion?" he asked. Her smile was different this time. Cool, almost detached. She handed him a glass of wine and spoke in an even, deliberate tone. "We need to talk." A knot of unease formed in David's stomach. "Talk? About what?" he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Evelyn drew a measured breath, her eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. "I want a divorce," she said calmly. The words hit David like a physical blow, and his hand trembled as he struggled to steady the wine glass. "What are you saying?" he stammered, disbelief clouding his thoughts. Her expression remained impassive. "I'm leaving you, David. I've been unhappy for years, and I've found someone else." The room seemed to spin around him. "Someone else? Who?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Brian," she replied without hesitation, her tone laced with cruel amusement. "Your friend, Brian. We've been together for months." David's heart sank. Brian, his childhood confidant and best man at his wedding, had betrayed him. Rage and despair warred within him as Evelyn observed his reaction with a detached air. "You must have seen this coming," she said, her voice tinged with mockery. "It's not as if you've been the perfect husband." David's voice cracked as he tried to form a response. "I thought we were happy. I thought—" She interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "Happy? We've been dead for years. I've just been waiting for the right time to leave, and now it's here." Evelyn's words grew sharper as she stepped closer. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. Don't try to stop me. If you do, I'll get a restraining order. You'll lose everything, the house, your job, even your reputation." Her ultimatum left David stunned and breathless. His world crumbled as she delivered the final blow. "Brian makes me feel alive. You? You're just dull, predictable David." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him alone in the wreckage of their life together. The days that followed were a blur of anguish. The once stable foundation of David's life dissolved into chaos. Rumors spread quickly, fueled by Evelyn's accusations of abuse and instability. Friends distanced themselves, believing the lies she spun. Even at work, Brian's influence led to whispers and suspicion. Before long, David was let go, the official explanation citing corporate restructuring. Despair gripped him. Isolated and humiliated, David withdrew from the world, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Each day bled into the next, consumed by thoughts of betrayal and loss. It was in this dark spiral that Jillian reappeared. Jillian had been a close friend in high school, though life had taken them on separate paths. Hearing about David's plight through mutual acquaintances, she reached out to him. When they met at a quiet bar, her presence felt like a beacon of hope. "I know what Evelyn did to you," she said bluntly, "and I think it's time to fight back." David frowned, unsure of her intent. "Fight back? How?" Jillian's eyes glinted with determination. "Revenge. Evelyn and Brian think they've won, that they can destroy you without consequences, but they're wrong." The idea unsettled David. "That's not who I am," he said hesitantly. She leaned closer, her tone resolute. Then who are you, David? Someone who lets them ruin your life? I have the skills to expose them for what they really are. Jillian outlined her plan. With her expertise in hacking and social media, she could uncover incriminating evidence against Evelyn and Brian, affairs, financial fraud, anything that would tarnish their carefully crafted images. At first, David resisted, but the memory of Evelyn's disdain and the betrayal he had suffered stirred a new resolve within him. "Let's do it," he said finally, his voice firm. In the weeks that followed, Jillian worked relentlessly. She unearthed a treasure trove of damning evidence, explicit messages, financial misdeeds, and hidden affairs. With David's consent, she released the information strategically, letting it snowball into an unstoppable public scandal. Evelyn and Brian's reputations disintegrated as their secrets became the talk of the internet. The storm of backlash left them reeling. For David, it was a bittersweet victory. Though his wounds ran deep, he found strength in reclaiming control over his life. And through Jillian's unwavering support, he began to piece himself back together, one step at a time. Evelyn tried fervently to shift the blame, arguing that Brown had orchestrated the attacks from the start. Her defense, however, fell on indifferent ears. The internet had already decided she was the antagonist in this drama. Meanwhile, Brown watched from afar as Evelyn's life spiraled out of control. Brian, too, faced severe repercussions. When their affair became public knowledge, he was dismissed from his job. United by disgrace, Evelyn and Brian found themselves shunned, their once passionate relationship crumbling under the weight of collective scorn. In her desperation, Evelyn reached out to Brown. She began with angry ultimatums but soon resorted to tearful appeals for mercy. Brown, however, offered no response. She had sown the seeds of her fate, and now she was reaping the harvest. As time passed and Evelyn's life continued to disintegrate, Brown began to rebuild his own. He relocated to a peaceful small town, far from the turmoil. Jillian joined him, and the trials they had faced together strengthened their bond, allowing them to heal from the chaos of their shared past. One tranquil evening, the two sat on the porch of Brown's new home, watching as the sun sank below the horizon. Breaking the silence, Jillian asked softly, "Do you ever second-guess it? The way you went about it?" Brown paused, his gaze fixed on the fading light as he contemplated her question. In the heat of the moment, vengeance had been satisfying, but it had not mended the heartbreak Evelyn had caused. "It didn't bring back what was lost," he admitted at last. "It didn't restore the years or the love I once felt for her. So, no, I don't regret it, but it doesn't feel good either." Jillian nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes," she said, "getting even is the only way to move forward." Brown watched as shadows lengthened across the yard. "Maybe," he murmured, "but it doesn't erase the scars." He glanced at Jillian, a faint smile softening his features. "At least we're starting fresh. That counts for something." Leaning into his shoulder, Jillian returned his smile. "It does," she agreed. "We're moving forward." As the sun dipped completely below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness, Brown felt a rare moment of calm. Though the pain of betrayal still lingered, it no longer felt suffocating. Yet even as peace began to settle within him, memories of the past clung to him like restless spirits. It wasn't just Evelyn's unfaithfulness or Brian's disloyalty that haunted him. It was the loss of his former self. He could no longer recognize the man who had once trusted so easily, who had believed in the innate goodness of people. The betrayals had shattered that belief. Life in the quiet town was different. The locals were unaware of his history, and their indifference provided a sense of relief. With Jillian by his side, he began crafting a new life. However, the stillness brought its own challenges. Many days, Brown sat for hours on the porch, his thoughts drifting back to the events that had upended his world. On one crisp autumn day, Jillian's voice interrupted his reverie. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't gone through with it?" she asked. Brown turned to her, confusion etched on his face. "Gone through with what?" "The revenge," she clarified. "What if you'd just walked away?" His eyes followed the swirling leaves caught in the autumn breeze as he considered her question. Late at night, He had often wondered whether exposing Evelyn and Brian had been worth the cost. "Sometimes I think I should have," he admitted. "Maybe the high road would have been better." Jillian frowned. "The high road? David, they tore your life apart. Evelyn destroyed your marriage and dragged your name through the mud. Brian betrayed you. You had every right to fight back." Running a hand through his hair, Brown's voice grew heavy. "I know, and I won't deny that watching their lives crumble brought some satisfaction. But it's more complicated than that." Jillian leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "What's complicated about it? They got what they deserved." "Maybe they did," Brown said quietly, "but I didn't have to become someone I didn't recognize to make it happen." Her brow furrowed as she countered. "You didn't change, David. You just stood up for yourself. People like Evelyn and Brian get away with their cruelty because no one stops them. You had the courage to fight back." Brown nodded but couldn't shake his unease. "But at what cost? I feel like I lost a part of who I was." Jillian's tone softened. "You're still the same person. You just can't see it yet." He leaned back and gazed up at the sky. "I used to believe in people. I thought love could fix anything, no matter how broken. Now I'm not so sure." "Love isn't about fixing everything," Jillian said gently. "Some things stay broken, but that doesn't mean you have to lose yourself in the process." Brown appreciated her honesty but remained conflicted. His actions hadn't delivered the closure he'd longed for. Revenge, while satisfying in the moment, had left a void. "I just want to stop being angry," he confessed. "I want to let it go, but I don't know how." Jillian placed her hand over his in a gesture of support. "Maybe it's time to focus on healing. You've spent so much energy fighting back. Now it's about finding peace." Her words struck a chord, though Brown wasn't sure where to begin. Revenge had been his anchor, and now, without it, he felt unmoored. A week later, he resolved to confront his past directly. On a brisk morning, he informed Jillian he needed to take a drive. She didn't question him, sensing it was something he needed to do on his own. As he drove toward the city, fragments of his old life played through his mind. Confronting Evelyn felt daunting, but he knew it was the only way to truly move forward. When he arrived at her apartment building, he hesitated, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The modest structure bore no resemblance to the home they had once shared. Through the window, he could see her silhouette moving inside. It was time to face the ghosts he had tried so hard to escape. The thought that the woman he once adored with all his heart was now little more than a stranger was nearly inconceivable. David stepped out of his car, the tension in his chest almost suffocating, and approached the door. His hand hovered briefly before he knocked. When the door opened, there she stood, Evelyn, her face a mixture of surprise and unease. The years had worn on her. The brilliance that once lit her eyes was dimmed, clouded by the weight of her choices. "David," she murmured, her tone uncertain. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steady but firm. Evelyn hesitated, casting a wary glance over her shoulder as if expecting someone else to appear. I don't think that's a good idea," she replied cautiously. David let out a slow, measured breath. "I'm not here to fight, Evelyn. I just need answers, for both our sakes." After a long pause, she stepped aside, silently inviting him in. The room was stark and uninviting, its sparse decor amplifying the discomfort between them. David stopped in the center of the space, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Evelyn gestured toward a chair, but he remained standing, his gaze fixed on hers with quiet resolve. "What do you want, David?" she asked at last, her voice subdued. "I want to understand," he said, the question that had haunted him for years finally breaking free. "Why did you do it? Why did you tear everything apart?" Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I don't have a good answer," she admitted quietly. "I made terrible mistakes, more than I can count. I thought I wanted something different, something exciting, but I was wrong." David's jaw tightened, his emotions swirling. He had braced himself for excuses, for justifications, but her raw admission left him feeling hollow. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears. "Every single day," she said, her voice breaking. For the first time in years, David truly saw her, not the woman he had once loved, but the person she had become, shaped by her missteps and regrets. "I don't hate you," he said, surprising even himself with the words. "I thought I did for a long time, but I don't. I just wish things had turned out differently." Evelyn wiped her tears with trembling fingers, her voice cracking as she responded, "I'm so sorry, David. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I am." David nodded slowly, a strange sense of peace washing over him. It wasn't forgiveness in its entirety, but it felt close enough. "I came here to say goodbye," he said with quiet determination. "Not just to you, but to the part of me that's been stuck in this pain. I need to move forward, and I hope you find a way to do the same." Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks as she gave a small nod. "I hope you find happiness, David. You deserve it." Without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind him, leaving him alone in the dimly lit hallway. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, the weight he'd carried for so long beginning to lift. As he made his way back to his car, David realized that he hadn't sought retribution or validation. What he needed was this: a quiet resolution, an acceptance that some wounds couldn't be undone. Driving back toward his small town and the life he was building with Jillian, he felt a newfound lightness. The scars of the past remained, but their power over him had diminished. In that quiet acceptance, he found the healing he'd been searching for all along. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.